appreciate that.
All right,
Until 5, Lori, I'm like,
I think we're gonna get going, okay, everybody?
we are all catching our.
Remember, we're on TV, so when you talk, you're, make sure the button's on in front of you. And don't worry about where you face, because they've got cameras everywhere to pick you up, okay? So I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 5th meeting of the Concord Middle School Building Committee. We've got a pretty full agenda today. We're really happy to welcome Hill International and their representatives here for the first time. We're going to be working together for quite a while, and it's exciting to get it kicked off and get to know you and start to talk about the first phases of the project. So welcome. I thought the first thing we might do is just go around and have people introduce themselves, so you know who you're talking to, and we do also. My name is Tim Holt, and I'm the co-chair of the building committee.
Dawn Guariello, also co-chair of the building committee and an architect and a townsperson here in Concord.
Chris Popova, community representative in Concord.
Fort Grove School Committee.
Russ Hughes, facilities manager for the school district.
Heather Bowden on the school committee also.
Good morning, Justin Cameron, middle school principal.
Joe Naughton, principal in charge with Hill International.
Mike Carroll, project director for Hill International.
Andy Bowe, project manager with Hill International.
Steve Crane, town manager.
John Harris, budget and purchasing director.
Susan Bates, select board.
Pat Nelson, citizen. Lori Hunter, superintendent. I'm gonna ask the committee if you'll have a microphone in front of you. There's a button underneath. Hold it and then let go and it should turn green, and then we should try to talk into them. Yes. So share them, please. Jared's running around somewhere, but you know Jared. So. Hold it and let go. It should turn on.
Be patient.
There you go.
Do we need to do that again?
Yeah.
I don't know where we were. I think we were
And
about.
Sam, you want us to do that again, or I
Fingers.
think? Alright, Sam says it's good enough, so just from here on, use the mic.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just don't worry about it.
And light goes on, but goes off.
Yeah.
Matt Root, community rep.
Charlie Parker, community rep.
All right, thanks everybody. We've got a number of items on the agenda, and hopefully we'll get through all of them, but the primary objective today is to have Hill introduce themselves, okay, their team, go over the project, high line of the project schedule, okay, and then talk about two items in particular, the project charter concept and how that might move forward, and secondarily, to touch on the designer selection process in a little bit more detail. So those are the things that we're going to try to accomplish with Hill. As I mentioned again earlier, if we come away from this meeting today having a better understanding of what will happen in the relatively near-term future with both the product charger and the designer RFS, okay, I would find that successful. So we know how to engage on that, we get a little feeling of the schedule, and we sort of know what comes next, okay? So that's sort of one of my goals. So with that, I'll turn it over to either Andy or
All right, thank you very much. So we were going to start by looking at the schedule, and we've got it up on the screen. Everybody's got a hard copy in front of you. But just before that, I just want to kind of open up if there's any questions, any concerns, any comments before we get going, because part of this is it needs to be interactive. We need to get your feedback because we're giving you some theoretical dates based off of past experiences, but our experiences may be different than what you're looking for your project. So just want to kind of open that up and start off with that you understand that this is a process where we're hoping to get a lot of feedback on it. So before we get going, is there anybody that has any comments, concerns?
Mr. Chairman, would it be helpful if I just update on the contract quickly?
I would love that. Yeah.
So
I think Hill would love that.
and I apologize. This is kind of a dumb new guy thing. This is the first contract I've processed for the town, and the process is a little different than I'm used to. So has been reviewed legally. We're waiting to hear back from our insurance company. And most contracts, the work is fine. It's the indemnification and liability language that we're working on. I'm sure it will be fine. I'm sure it'll be done hopefully by the end of this week, if not early next week. Like I said, our insurance carrier has had it for a week. But I want to thank Hill for being here anyway, and I'm sure we'll reach an agreement in the very near future.
Great. And then I would add to that the appreciation for you guys to be willing to come out to get going here with it not completely finished. So thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for having us. We couldn't wait to get going.
Yeah. Okay, the top level project schedule.
So like I said, everybody has this in front of you as well. It's the large 11 by 17 sheet. I wanted to start showing you the whole schedule here. What we've done here, kind of in a nutshell, is we've concentrated on this first 12-month period, which basically starts today. It gets us to a town meeting and town vote and funding potentially for the full project. And then we've got a couple of potential milestone groupings, if you will, to understand what you would need to do and where we're thinking the project may be going. So we're gonna really concentrate on this first part of it, and I'll zoom in on this so we can read it a little bit easier. But we did wanna give you an overall, what we think is a potential. Again, we always feel is, if I put something on the screen, I can get a reaction from it, that we like it, we don't like it, that kind of thing, rather than asking, just a blank screen and asking people to fill in the blanks.
So just on the top line, what we're looking at right here would lead us to be in a position to discuss this with the town at what time?
So I'm gonna zoom in here a little bit so we can see it a little bit easier. And scroll down here just a little bit. What we're shooting for right now is, and let me just make this a little bit smaller so we can see. So right now, not knowing the exact dates, I plugged in November 9th. It's, kind of middle of November as the town meeting. There was a discussion the other day that you need to present or put this out 45 days prior to the meeting. So we have that activity here. And prior to that, we have the estimates coming in, the drawings being done. So what we're looking at here is that on line 35, you'd have the estimate done and approved in mid-September, allowing the 45 days notice to be sent out to the town with a meeting sometime mid-November. That's kind of the basis that we've started for. I know there was discussion that you might have an October meeting versus November, but again, we can adjust this as needed.
And some of the answers to this will come out as we look at the detail, but in your opinion, having done this many times, is this a reasonable schedule?
I think this is reasonable. This is actually mirroring what we've done in 2 projects with Braintree, 1 project with Weymouth, 1 project with Milford. So we've done several different projects of this similar size and nature in this type of time frame.
Okay. Great.
So just scanning back up to the top here, kind of starting at the top down. So we put in we started with the OPM interview because that's kind of when our first activity was. We know you've done a lot of work prior to that, but we started with that as the initial date, and the interviews were on August 14th. So everything that we've shown from here forward is basically starting with that August 14th date and moving forward. We just talked, Stephen talked with us briefly about the contract that's in process right now, and really what we're going to be getting into the next step here is the designer selection. So overall, the designer selection we've got is 58 days, just so everybody understands, these are working days. So Saturdays, Sundays, holidays are not included. So when you're looking at it, just keep in mind a typical month is about 22 days. So at 58 days, you're looking at a little over 2 months from basically the start of our negotiations, which was August 20th, to get it. So we're already 2 weeks into this section, if you will. So we're looking basically early November to have a designer kickoff meeting is what we're proposing here right now. And kind of walk you through it, we're in the process of line 9 right now, the draft designer RFS. So everybody's got a draft hard copy in front of you. We can distribute that electronically after the meeting to the team, and we can start looking at it and start getting feedback on that. So what we're looking at right now, this is based off of this submission being September 5th, which is today, and that's on line 10. We're looking at review over the next week or so. That's the 5 days. It's a week time period for everybody to give comments. And if everybody's comfortable with it, and this is part of the discussion we have, is do we need to wait till we come back to meeting next time before we would release it? Or is there the ability to have emails back and forth and that kind of thing? So that's, I guess, one of our questions for you. We're assuming if we've given you the document here, we can work it out and we can go to advertisement with the Central Register potentially on September 13th. The way the Central Register works, if you put the advertisement in by the Thursday of 1 week, it gets published the Wednesday of the following week. So even though we're saying we have a week to review this RFS, we actually have a couple more days that we can, put the finishing touches on it if you need to, in order for it to basically be ready by September 23rd. So September 23rd, this line here, that's the key date right here. We have to have the RFS 100% complete and ready so that when it's advertised, if we get a contact from a design team, that we would have it so we can submit it out to them at that.
That's a little over 2 weeks from now.
Correct.
I have a question. You need to submit it the Thursday prior, right? So if that's coming out the 23rd is a Monday? We're talking September, right? 23rd's a Monday?
Yeah, that changed. I think we had September 25th last night.
Yeah, the 25th is a Wednesday. The 19th would be the Thursday prior, not the 13th is
Yeah.
2 Fridays prior. So you're looking at either the 12th or the 19th to get it in prior to.
So you are right. I'm sorry. I don't know
That's
why
all
it's
right.
showing the 25th, but we had the 25th last night.
Okay.
So the 25th is the date that we're shooting for, the Wednesday.
Okay, so then it needs to be complete by the 19th, which is when you submit it the Thursday prior. Okay, so all comments and changes need to be done by the 19th.
We typically, we can have an informational meeting if we choose to. Again, that's a question we'd have for you. A lot of times, if you're renovating an existing building, it's highly recommended to have that information meeting. If you're leading towards the new building, it's kind of a 50-50 shot with you. I mean, it's still valuable because you know the site, you can let them see the site and start getting an understanding of it and ask questions. So again, that's something that we would put out.
As a designer, I would say that's valuable time, that we typically do research prior and then ask questions that we can strategize to put into our proposal. So, as someone that's on the other side of it, I value those because I can have one-on-one questions with whoever, the superintendent or the principal, whoever, the facilities, whoever I can grab. I bring a list of questions to that, and it's not always about the existing building. It might be about goals, it might be about prior studies, whatever research is done.
Exactly, and so right now, we've got a 3-week period for them to pull their packages together. And what we've done is we assume that the site walk, if you will be about a week into the process. So we give them a week to get in there to do their research and formulate their questions. Then we allow them to ask the questions. We may need to actually do some research on our end to respond to the questions officially, so that's why we want to give it a little bit of time. Yep. And that's the time period that we've got there. So with the 3 weeks for that, the next step here would be reviewing with the proposals. And we've given ourselves a week for that. So typically what a school building committee would do is appoint a subcommittee to actually review that. We would typically be on that subcommittee with your team. We will actually create I'll call it a bid tab, like what you would do for a contractor, where we have all of the proposers across the top of the sheet, and then you have all the prerequisites, absolute requirements, and then all the wish list and want list, if you will, from the RFP, so that we can actually have an evaluation sheet. Phil's team will work to fill that out and present it to you, so that you can take a look at that.
Mike, we do have a subcommittee, a design subcommittee.
Okay.
That's led by Don.
All right, perfect.
That either all or a portion of which will be a part of the review process, correct?
Yes.
Right.
And we can talk about that. At one time, we talked about the same subcommittee that did the OPM, but maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, so we can review it and maybe add some design subcommittee members if there's a desire.
Right. And Jared, we cut you.
So, again, we're keeping these dates pretty tight. We're trying to keep the dates pretty tight because we know we're anxious to get moving on this project. So, don't feel that, if you think these are too tight, too short, certainly let me know, but we know we're trying to get the designer on board as quickly as we can and get right into that design process. The one thing I will say is right now, we've also kind of, I'll say, backed into the dates because we know there's a November town meeting. So I think we have a little bit of flexibility here, within, I think there's a little bit of adjustment. It would be good to get some feedback. I think the feasibility, for example, when we get into it, may be a little longer than needed because I think this committee already knows pretty well where you're heading. And we account for a little bit more feasibility, maybe not as much as I would have on the school that doesn't even know if they're doing an addition, renovation, or a new project yet. But I kind of bridge the gap halfway between full feasibility and a really short one, so that
So, just because this is a separate agenda item, but we have this up here right now, between now and the 19th or whatever, what are the things that will happen from both us and you?
So I think the first step is we've got the RFS in front of everybody today. We will get that out electronically as well, and we'd like to just start getting feedback, any comments that we're missing something, or this information needs to be adjusted, that type of thing. What we've tried to do is we took an RFS from a previous project that we've used. We've taken the information that we've gotten from the OPM RFS, as well as the discussions we've had with you. We've only had some brief discussions, but we've had some discussions. We've tried to add some wording in there, for example, about the net zero, which is a primary goal of this project. We've talked about the new building more so than looking at options of addition, renovation versus new, because again, it seems like that part of the feasibility has already been completed. It doesn't mean that this designer shouldn't maybe take another look at that, at least briefly, but that will be up to the committee to decide, the course of action that you'd like to move forward with there.
So Don, from our standpoint, how should that input be collected and distributed to them?
As far as comments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because everybody's gonna get this document.
Right, I guess filter them through myself and then Jared and I can collaborate as we did on the OPM one, just as a suggestion.
Well, and just because you're asking about this process, one of your questions was, can that be published or submitted before this committee meets again? And I think we just need to figure out process there, as long as this committee looks at something today and says, oh, well, we're comfortable with sending feedback to you and then,
Our next
Don and
meeting
Jared
is on
confirm the final
19th.
draft before it goes out.
We meet on the 19th.
2 weeks, yeah.
2 weeks on the 19th, so I
Okay.
would suggest that the subcommittee and the previous selection committee, whatever, do their work to get comments and get it channeled to them, and then I think it's okay for the broader committee to see that in a near final form
Yeah.
on the 19th. Is that?
I think it has to be by
Everybody
4
good
or
with
5
that?
o'clock that day.
Okay,
And
so
we
we
meet
can
at this time,
confirm
so-
it in the morning and then submit it.
If everyone's comfortable with that, I am.
That makes sense.
So we can try to collect comments, why don't we say the Friday before, let me look at my calendar. So that any changes can be made before Thursday morning's meeting, so you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday that week. So by next Friday, the 13th,
Dawn, sorry.
yeah,
I've held 7:30 on Thursdays every week, so if there's a way the subcommittee could meet next Thursday, which would mean we want the feedback earlier, just in terms of logistics with school going,
That makes sense.
sure.
if the more we can hold to Thursdays would be huge benefits to me and Jared and
Okay.
Justin.
So we'd wanna see it by Wednesday.
Yeah, so that would shave a couple days off
Okay,
of that.
so that's the
that works.
11th. If
Yeah.
anyone can, and then do we wanna say the first design subcommittee meeting would be Thursday at 7:30?
That's
Here,
great.
is this a good,
Yeah.
okay, so we'll have to do a public
It works
meeting.
well for the finance committee.
In terms of collecting comments on proposals and things like that from committee members going directly to you, that
Yeah.
could look like a rolling quorum under the open meeting law. Whereas if Jared consolidates all the comments and reports them to you, that would not be a violation.
I am completely amenable to that. the fewer emails I have to get through, the better.
Certainly the
So,
fewer
sorry,
buttons.
Jared, but
Under
let's
the-
send all comments to Jared. That's
Yeah, I mean, it's,
perfect.
if there's no
That's-
deliberation,
Yeah.
but there
Yeah.
still is kind of
No.
a perception thing, so just keep it clean.
Absolutely, good, thank you.
Very
Yep.
good.
Thank you.
Okay, so all comments to Jared by Wednesday, the 11th, please.
Oh,
And
and
John pointed
Mike,
that
just a procedural point, in terms of electronic versus paper, it's my feeling that only thing that we need in paper is stuff that will facilitate a specific meeting, and all our documents are fine to be distributed electronically. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah. I.e. minimize the amount of paper, and
Absolutely.
everybody's pretty facile with the other.
All right. So
Sorry, I have two questions. So are we saying that the design is the OPM subcommittee rolling over into the design?
There was
designer
talk
selection,
a couple
or is the
meetings ago.
design-
Right.
Yeah, of that, and I don't know how, I don't know. I'm willing to participate again. I don't know if others have, like,
If we have a design subcommittee
Yeah.
now, I feel like
Right.
the design subcommittee should be the group that does this RFS.
I agree.
Or the
Yeah,
designer
I would
selections.
tend to agree with that.
with Jared included, and you're on the design side, so.
Is everybody okay with that?
I'm on it.
Is everyone okay? Okay.
So I guess my second question is, it's a great timeline, it seems, I guess what I feel is missing from the RFS without having looked at it is more specific kind of Concord goals, like an owner's project requirements. And I worry that 2 weeks is a very tight timeline for us to get to consensus on that. And in my opinion, that's critical for helping us all get on the same page of what we wanna see from a future designer.
I think it certainly could be a little tight, and that's why we wanted the discussion. The one thing I will say is that we've taken the information that you already compiled requiring for the OPM, and we've transferred that information in now. The designer probably needs a little bit more detail than the OPM because the designer is doing the design.
Right.
We're managing the designers. So from that perspective, that may not be enough, but I think once you see what we've got in there, again, it'll start facilitating you know, posing the questions in your head, and then we'll have that understanding.
One of the, I would sort of build on what Matt said there, that one of the, not necessarily the benefits specifically for this item, but in general, that process of establishing our goals in Project Charter is good for this committee in many ways, because that brings us together on what we're trying to do along a number of dimensions, and I think that's a parallel process. Would that be?
And we're gonna be talking about the charter, that's the next thing we'll talk about after we have
And
schedule.
with regard to this item and the charter, getting it in such shape that this is a good document for an RFS,
Yeah.
with the, probably the noting on that section that we're in the process of developing it, and this is our initial draft or something by the state. Does that make sense? Because I think we want to get this charter right?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I don't understand the language, so where does the charter play in, to the RFS? Is that an attachment typically to the RFS?
The charter would not be specific to the RFS at all, but
Okay.
what we would do is, so what a charter is, and let me just pull it up here real quick. So this is a draft charter. Again, you've got a copy of it in front of you. This information is not necessarily specific to your project, but it's information that we've gotten from other projects. So really what a charter is just very simply, we're writing down all the key points of what this project needs to accomplish. So usually the first item on a charter would be defining the project has to meet the educational program. That's first and foremost. So if we don't meet the educational program, nothing else really matters, right? So we need to meet the educational program. And again, this charter can have as much or as little information as you want, but it's really at the end of the project, when we go down this charter, if we can check every one of these boxes, that means we probably had a successful project. So that's really what we want to do. We want to understand what is the budget potentially, what is the size, if we need an auditorium, for example. MSBA doesn't typically allow auditoriums in a middle school. You may want an auditorium in your middle school. So that might be something we put down here. If we want larger gym sizes, all those kind of things that we can understand. And what happens is this charter doesn't get attached to the design RFP, but the information from this charter helps us complete the RFP, provide that information into the RFP. So the charter is going to be a living document for a good part of the time here. Really what we want to do is get this committee in tune with the charter, everybody comfortable with it, and maybe we try to organize the charter a little bit to the needs, the absolutes, and then maybe the wish list, that kind of thing, so we have an idea. When the designer ultimately gets on board, we need to meet with the designer as well and get their input on that, because they may have an alternate view to something that enlightens the team. And then ultimately, once the designer's on board, what we actually like to see is literally print out a hard copy of this and have, say, the chair sign it, he'll sign it, and the designer sign it. And what that does is, if we're going down the road 6 months into the design, and the designer's designing a 20,000 square foot gym, and we said we wanted a 10,000 square foot gym, we can come back and remind them, hey, wait, we're getting off the track is this. The other thing it gives us the opportunity to do is if you decide halfway into the project that you do need a bigger gym, we can do that, but if it's different than the charter, what we would recommend is we, as a group, come back and visit that major change with the design team and the committee and get that change approved as a group. Because if you wanna add a second gym, for example, that's fine, but we may also have to adjust the budget then, right? We can't just double the size of the building and say, well, we're gonna do it for the same price. So it gives everybody a chance to come back and revisit when there's a change and say, hey, does this make sense? Are we thinking of all the steps? And I think that's the idea of a charter. So we've got a few general bullet points here, but this is the part of the presentation, I'll say, that I should be kind of quiet and listening to you, and we can write them down. Andy's gonna be writing them down there. I can type them in here, that kind of thing. But we wanna know what is important for you to make this project successful.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mike, I think it's great. I think some of us, at least me specifically, I've already started, I think of it as an owner's project requirement. I would love to see it in the RFS if we can move quickly enough. And maybe Don, you can speak to this. I guess I feel like if we tell the design team what we're looking for, then they'll know how to tailor more for our bid. And also it'll help us in deciding which design teams have the strengths based on our charter that we're looking for. So
Sorry, Chris.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of comments. As a designer, that's more information than you would typically get in an RFS. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think you can't complete this until you have the designer on board. I see this more as a goals list. I don't see it as a task list. This is not like, oh, you need to have a, 12,000 square foot gym, like check the box. That's not, you have a space summary for that. You have a list of spaces that will work with the designer when they're on board based on the educational program and recognizing how big the classes are, how many, they should go through the middle school schedule and figure out how many kids are in each class at what time. They need to do a programming effort that will help us figure out how many classrooms we need, how big the gym needs to be, how many special ed spaces are there, unique spaces that exist for Concord versus other towns. Everyone has unique spaces. So that's what the space summary in my mind is for. I don't wanna necessarily, if it's important to say, yes, we need to have an auditorium, great, put it on here, but I don't wanna know how big it is or how, that's for them to figure out. So I think it's more, in my mind, it's here are the things we want to achieve. It's a goal list. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it wants to be like a exhaustive task list. I think that's different, and that's something that we can, if we want to present that to them as, here's what you need to do along the way, that's great. But I think this wants to be like big picture goals.
Absolutely, I agree.
And if we don't meet them all, then maybe they were, aspirational, and we want to get to net zero, for example. We want to get there, right? But it's going to take a lot to get there. So let's all understand what that means, but that's not to say we don't want to tell the designer we want to get there. we wanna do our best to get there or get as close as possible. You know, so I think this, for me, is, I've actually never done this, I've never worked with Hill, so I've never done like a project charter, but usually what comes out of the visioning sessions and the educational programming effort, which is one of the first things the designer typically does when they get hired, is to come up with project goals. And every time I present to school building committees, I say, here, let's all remind ourselves right in the beginning, what are our project goals? Because everything we do needs to point back to those goals. So that's how I'm sort of seeing this, and I don't know if that's.
I think you're right. I think I may have been focusing in too much on auditorium. What I should have said is, if there's things that aren't in a typical MSBA project, we may want to highlight them. Like that's what I would, like the auditorium, for example. I think I heard something about MSBA doesn't typically allow an auditorium. So in the designer RFP, if we want an auditorium, we should mention that because that is going to affect their sub-consultants and who they have on their team.
I would actually say you want to be a little looser than that and say performing space, and let's figure out what that means. Is it a true auditorium? Is it a black box? What is it, right? Yeah. So for me, I don't even know. I don't have the answer, but maybe Lori and Justin.
I know what I want. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, so you know,
We do my presentation.
So I think we want to, let them start to be creative about it and offer solutions and help us figure out what we need rather than us just say, yes, we want an auditorium, because maybe that's not the answer. And this process will flesh that out. So
So bring that back, go ahead.
All right, the one last thing, I was just like Dawn was saying, as the designer gets in and starts understanding and working on what is the educational program,
Exactly.
this list can completely change. I mean, or I won't complete, but it can change substantially because those goals aren't known until the program is done and until you have that education. You might think you know what the educational program is, but then you do an enrollment study and you realize, oh, we're gonna have more enrollment or less enrollment, and that's gonna affect the program. So I think all of that is important to have the designer be part of that.
It sounds as if though, at some point, this will become part of a contract document. So our designer, for example, if the designer is not meeting one of these goals, having signed this and having our chair sign it and so forth, at some point, people will look and say, wait a minute, you've deviated somewhat from our contract. So we're not putting it in the RFS, where it could be folded into the ultimate contract. We're waiting until we actually have our designer, have the goals, and then the designer is now saying, great, this is my goal.
I've never actually put it in the contract because then if you wanted to change it, then you'd actually have to give them a change order. So I think it's more of a guidelines and goals.
It's part of the deliverable, Chris. So it's not because you don't know when you sign the contract what it will be because it's a working document. It's a living document.
No, I understand that. It's just at some point, if there is a dispute and there's something memorialized that people have signed or committed to, it's a great argument for the lawyers to say, this became part of your contract at some point in this. And therefore, the only goal is to make sure whatever's in this project charter is in sync with everything else. So there is no great dispute coming in that says, well, wait, the designer went this direction and it doesn't even come close to that. See what I mean? I don't want cognitive dissonance 8 months into this project. That's all.
Okay, kind of circling back, okay? It seems pretty clear that there are two things that have to be accomplished here. One is to get an RFS out for the designer. And number two, there's this notion of project charter or project goals that have to be developed relating to this project. They are related, but not necessarily one is on a critical path for the other.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's
okay.
And just so everybody understands, the RFP, we can always do an addendum if there was something that we felt came up after the fact that was committees felt strongly needed.
In terms of getting what is necessary into this RFS relating to the owner's wishes, we have a process that will do that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Independent of a full charter.
Yes. So the process I think we're saying right now is everybody's going to provide comments by next Wednesday. On Thursday, we'll meet with the subcommittee here. And the subcommittee will review those comments, we'll incorporate them into the document, we can do that live while we're here. And then we'll have a document at the end of that meeting that the subcommittee has I'll say endorsed and recommended to go to the full committee.
Yeah.
If we can get that document out by the end of the day Friday to the full committee, so that the following Thursday, when we're meeting at the full committee, that you can ratify that and we can get everything to the central register and we can move it forward.
So here's what I kind of suggest, we focus on that in terms, from a logistics standpoint, in terms of input. That input going to Don.
Jared.
No, excuse me, going to Jared. Lateral.
I remember.
And over this next period of time, I think that's a reasonable goal. At the same time, you have distributed what is a sample project charter to everyone here, and people here can begin to think about that.
And we can get that electronically.
And then we revisit that at our next meeting in terms of what the process is with us, the designer, and yourselves to accomplish that set of goals or charter. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense, and if people want to get information to Jared on that and get it to us, we can just have it on the updated draft charter next time, so that they can do something.
Yeah, I just wanna say, I don't think the committee is looking to design, certainly at the detail. I will say that I think if we don't define our aspirational goals and we wait until a designer is on, then they won't be as aspirational.
Can I just stop for one thing? Sometimes this does look very analytical, and it looks like we're trying to prescribe what the building wants to be in terms of an analytical mathematical document. And that works for some clients. Clearly, there's a vibe that's probably not where we want to start here. But what we've done with others, clients and different types of projects, is we start from the other side of the paper. We start from zero, and we just kind of go around the table, spend some time. This is a really important project. We want to get it right. We don't pretend to know what the essence of the job is yet, other than what we've read. So what we think is usually very, very important is to literally go around the room and ask each one of you. Each one of you is here for a reason. Ask each one of you, what do you think the project needs to be when it's done to achieve success? And most likely, everybody at the table will say something different. We'd probably find a lot of value in just doing just that, because then you'll have a chance to say up front what you expect. We'll write it down and we'll put it up on the wall. Some things, may be repeated, or there may be things that sound slightly redundant, so we may collapse them into a shorter list. But all we're really trying to do is give all of us a roadmap, so that as we move forward, if we get excited about something and we bounce outside the lines, it's a chance to say, hey, we're outside the lines. It's okay if we want to be there. If we do, then we need to revise our charter and we'll continue to move forward. If not, let's take a step back. Is this what we really want to do before we move off on the path? Because we don't lose any time. And let's move back. And that way nobody's feelings get hurt. It's, we did this up front before anybody got, outside the lines, I guess. So that's another way of doing it, is just starting from a blank piece of paper if you'd like. And we'd really like to do that with you if that's something that you want to invest some time in.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to maybe spin what Joe just said a little differently. Because I did, Mike, I appreciate the description of it, and this, I guess I look at this as a two-phase process with the charter. I think it is an exceptionally important process, both phases, but phase one is the committee. And I guess I would make the recommendation that as you go through that process, the audience of this document is the community.
Right.
This is the committee's view of what we want from our project. And an example I'll use is there's a big difference between the budget is 100 million and the budget shall not exceed 100 million. So things like that. And if 100 million is what we want to spend and we're going to spend it a number, that's one thing. But if we're going to get the best building we can for under 100 million, that's a different message. I'm not saying which one the committee should send. I'm just saying that's like a fine point you would debate in that session that Joe's describing.
Very good point, very important.
So then when you get the designer on board, you have another goal setting session where they say, based on our experience, these things you want to accomplish can be achieved with these design elements or you can't. And it's that session that enables that second session that enables you to go back to the community when they say, why don't we have a recording studio? And you can say, well, that was a goal, but then we met with the designer and it was going to drive costs, and we decided not to amend our charter to not do that. And so I do think it was a two-phase process. But again, I think the first phase, the audience is the community, And in the second phase, the audience really is back to being this committee, because it really is then a sort of design guideline. And I hope I said that in the way you were thinking.
You did, and actually, if I can just insert that, I think the phase 2 needs to happen after the educational program is
The building program should
established
start,
and,
sure.
yes, so I think the designer needs that process in order to help us with the phase 2 of the charter. Does that make sense? So they need to understand what we're trying to do educationally before they can sort of comment on if what we're trying to do will work or not.
I think that was valuable. There's a couple elements in there I think that were really important. One is it's not just aspirational, it's got constraints in it also. And number 2, that the community needs to be involved in the process, okay?
Or their views need to be represented, and that's what you guys are all here to do, is represent the
Yeah,
community's
but
views.
there are sessions where we present it and they give feedback and we consider the feedback, right? That was valuable. So what I would suggest on this, we proceed forward with the RFS as we are going with the comments. And I think another discussion between our management committee and you guys relating to the project charter and goals to come up with a process to approach that.
Absolutely.
And does that mean, sorry, just to clarify, because I completely agree with this process. The first version, which is kind of the a high level list of goals, is that going to go along with the RFS as it goes out? Is that what we've decided?
Right now, it's gonna pass out this example of the charter
Right.
with regard to the charter process, okay? It's gonna pass that out. Our management group, and we'll sit down with them and talk about that as a process to move forward with the charter or goals or whatever we call it.
Mhm.
Okay, that's sort of a parallel process where the RFS thing is not dependent on it right now. Okay?
But it's important to say that the RFS does have project objectives in it.
Right.
And I was going to bring up, you actually have 2 sets of it, so I just wanna clarify which we should be
Well, and
commenting
that's
on.
part of the discussion, yeah.
Okay,
Sometimes we give you different formats. Do you like this format versus that format,
Okay.
that type of thing, so.
okay, because I think immediately, short term, this is a stepping stone to the charter, right? Like this is
Right.
what we want to tell them. Here are all the things that we're looking to do that you need to focus your proposal and or interview on, right?
So
So
those
that
things
they,
that you were bringing up, Matt, they could be included in the project objective.
yes, so
Makes
those are, if
Yes.
you focus on nothing more before next Wednesday, in my opinion, focus on the project objectives. Because the rest of it's sort of data, right, and dates, and if you're not comfortable with that and don't do it for a living, feel free to focus on the objectives. Okay, because that is what's important, and to Joe's point, if we wanted to go around and collect a initial list, if people are comfortable doing that, I'll, ask Tim if he'd like to, but that may give a flavor and or start to get the wheels churning on what.
Right now, I just wanna concentrate on getting the document done with enough input
Yeah.
to get that
This,
section done.
for me, is where I start.
And I wanna do the other process very, very well and thoughtfully. So
Yeah.
I want it to be-
Mr. Chair, sorry, Tim, I'm not to maybe make too fine a point of it, but I can see where there's some conflation between, project goals and this charter document, which is also project goals, and I guess I would ask the OPM, the charter or the goals, or whatever you wanna call it, or what the committee wants to accomplish. But in the RFS, isn't it, these project objectives these are the things we want the designer to be able to do?
They are, and I think, the charter isn't actually in the RFS.
Right.
But a lot of the same information is in both.
Right.
So I think, to your point, what we wanna highlight here is what skill sets the designer needs to have in order to be able to work on our project.
And I just wanted to distinguish between that, which is a
Yes.
specific procurement threshold,
Correct.
and project goals, which is something that is going to evolve as this process moves forward. Is that
It's a good
is that a meaningful distinction? Is that a distinction or a difference?
Can
Or?
we still go through the RFS with us? I feel like I'm in a blind conversation, because some of us are glancing at stuff, and some of us know what we wish was in here, and we haven't actually looked at it yet. Could we spend a few minutes just going through the draft?
Right.
I'd be happy to do that. I want to just return to one point that I think, Matt, you started with, which was a very general point, which, if I can translate it so I got it right, was let's make sure that we're not driven by December 12th. This is too critical. So let's try to work ambitious schedule goals, but let's not preempt a real thorough job on this.
Thank you.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we're gonna come back to this for 500 plus days, what we do here in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and a suggestion here to go through you provided a sample
I did.
or drafts of an RFS. Is it useful for us to go through that in anticipation of the input that people are gonna give?
We can definitely do that, yeah. Do you want me to give you 2 more minutes on the schedule, just kind of get close the loop, and then
at a
we'll?
high level.
Yeah.
We're focused right now on what we gotta get done in the next month, but,
So at a high level, what we're looking at is if we can hold the schedule that we've got right now, we could have a designer on mid-November of this year. That allows us basically 94 days, which again, those are working days, not calendar days. So when you do the math out there, you're going from mid-November to the end of March. You've got about 4.5 months there to get through the feasibility. And then from there, we would go through the schematic, and during the feasibility, there's always an estimate done at the end of that. Then through schematic, you're starting basically April 1st, March 31st, and you're going through mid-September. And what that allows us to do is get an estimate together again. So we have a set of documents, an estimate from the design team, an estimate from the OPM that have been reconciled. So you have 2 separate estimates to kind of validate that project cost. And that would be the documentation that you could then submit out to the town for discussion at town meeting. You'd have a schematic set of documents with a preferred design in that document with a cost that you would move forward to committee, from committee to the town meeting. And then we get the town meeting notice in mid-September, town meeting for mid-November, 45 days later, and again, that's calendar days. And then you securing the financing, and then you can get the OPM designer contracts extension. So typically, this isn't an MSBA project, but you're following that process of the OPM and the designer would be under contract to start feasibility through the end of schematic. And then you would do a contract extension to go into design development, construction documents, and then the contract for actually performing the construction. So in that, and again, this is something I'd love to maybe sit down with Don specifically on the durations on the design times here, but we've got about another 1.5 years or so to get the design development drawings done and the construction documents done. There's gonna be discussion at a future date whether this goes 149, which is lump sum low bid, or 149A, which is CM at risk. And that can affect the end of the construction documents and the start of the construction. If you have a CM at risk project, you might have early packages, things like that. But this is just, again, a high level discussion. What this is looking at is by February of 2022, you would have the design documents complete. And then you'd be able to bid it out, and you would be getting going in March of 2022. We're assuming a new building off to the side, not a lot of phasing or anything like that needed. With that, we figure 15 months to actually construct the new building. And that would basically give us June, here, if you're looking at building complete the end of June of 2023, gives us the summer to move into the new building. And we would start the demolition of the old building and doing fields or parking lots and things like that, depending on, again, exactly how the design unfolds.
Just a quick question, on there it says construction is 546 days, February 24th of 22 to April of 24, but then all your move-ins are in 23.
So what we're showing there is the intent would be to build the new building and have that complete by June of, the summer of 23, so you can move in. But that doesn't necessarily, I don't think the 15 months is enough time to build a new building and then tear down the old building and then build whatever is going in place of the old building, whether it's parking lots or fields.
Right.
And what we actually were talking about, Andy and I were talking about, we think that demolition and reconstruction could probably be done within 4, 5, 6 months. So, but that puts you in December.
Yeah, it's
And we
winter.
carried that out through April, just because you may have grass or plantings that have to go in at the end of that phase. So we realistically think the school could be open that summer of 23 with the demolition and everything ongoing. And that would finish at some point, probably that calendar year. But it might carry into the fall and spring just because of the plantings, basically.
Yeah, understanding that we'll learn a lot more about this in the next year, I would want to get your reaction to the
We were hoping for earlier. And Mike heard me say that the other day when we spoke to him on the phone. I think we had hoped, 4 years is what I'm used to in an MSBA project, and we were hoping to pick some time up. We've all said I had that conversation, but we need to be reasonable about and realistic about it too. So I don't know if this is the time and place to have that conversation. We've got a lot of more imminent things to talk about.
Well, and again,
So-
over this year, that's gonna be
Yeah.
quite a.
And I think that same at-risk process, do we do early packages?
Yeah.
That can greatly affect the, you know, so that's the discussion.
So just to give you a little bit of feedback, we're whispering on the side over here, that town meeting process also has a ballot vote attached, and Stephen's office and the select board are gonna have to get all the timelines secured there, because there's actually another step after town meeting,
Okay.
which is another 45 days, so
Yeah.
we gotta factor all that in.
Yeah, 30 to 45
tweak that.
days. Yeah.
Alright, so we should definitely, that's the type.
It just needs tweaking.
It just,
Yeah.
you have to add town election,
Right,
to that, and, cause then you don't get the money if you don't have the
no, you need
votes
the
and ballot.
two-step.
The biggest date on here that for this committee, for this phase of the project, is about a year from now to have a schematic design completed.
I would say
Also,
sorry Heather, in a perfect world, maybe it's done a month prior and you can pick that up somewhere between feasibility and SD. SD
Yeah.
is even longer than what I'm currently doing on a project, which is an MSBA project. So I think there's some wiggle room there to be able to, one, give us more time for a ballot vote and all the dates that need to sort of backtrack from that, right? And then also to have more time for the PR process, to be able to go out to the community and have basically end of summer. In an ideal world, we have a budget, we have something we've all agreed on, we can hit this new school year and go into the fall, you know, with a PR campaign to get,
So that's how,
everyone
that's sort of the highlight.
No, and you're exactly right, we knew it was a November meeting, so we kind of adjusted the durations. I think the feasibility is going on as well, so
Yeah.
if there's an opportunity to do that, but the other part of this is, if we have the design done on July 5th and the meeting isn't until November, you know, there's a long lag there, so we have to kind of, I don't think you can do a town meeting in the middle of the summer, but maybe, you know.
So actually, that
Maybe
there
it's
isn't
not.
a set town meeting in November. Our
Okay.
regular town meeting is April, so we'd be requesting a special town meeting. I think September or October could make more sense for that. The other thing we wanna keep in mind, as we were just whispering about, is we have another election coming up in November of 2020, that we might all wanna just be aware of in this time scheme. Given that the presidential elections are gonna be happening then, we just wanna think about the timing there also. So my thought initially as we look at this is that we should be aiming for a special town meeting in September or October. And then we're ahead of it, you know, I don't know if we're trying to link up the ballot vote that will have to happen with this, with the presidential election, but vote or, but that's not, I'm not saying that's not necessarily, but we don't want these to be happening right at the same time either, so it's just something that we'll have to keep in mind.
All right, now we got into this.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to, okay, I think that was a good discussion, and I think people have an understanding of the overall schedule. And as importantly, the things that we have to accomplish in the near future, because the step to meeting the end date is completing the task that's on the critical path right in front of you. That's the most important thing you can do. Okay, so I think it'd be useful now to spend a little time, as Lori suggested, on the draft
Absolutely.
RFS. Okay.
So I'm gonna close this file, this is the project directory, everybody's got a copy of it, we'll work with Jared to make sure everything's, every information in that's correct. I have wrong email address or something, people just let me know on that, but that's all I'm gonna talk about with the directory, just everybody's got a copy of it.
Does everyone have, I made a mistake and only copied the odd pages. Does anyone have blanks on the back pages, maybe the audience? Anyone here? Have an extra. Have an extra copy.
The RFS
The
itself,
RFS, okay.
so if
I
you only have
double-sided.
one-sided, let us know.
Yes.
Double my work.
Jared, are there more?
Yeah.
It's okay, I can get it.
So
Extras up
I
here.
put together like the draft RFS, just so kind of discussing your feedback from the committee. I'll go through Jared.
So some of the question, I put them on highlights, and Don is right, we duplicate some of the stuff because we need to get some feedback. For example, like the objective, the schedule, we get like 2 different format in here. There are different type of RFS out there, so some of them, they have specific dates on it, and some of them, they have like specific weeks. So that's why we want to get some feedback. I have them highlight, like for example, the goal is to have net zero. Do we want to have like a LEED platinum or LEED gold certification as well? So some of the stuff here, we want to get some feedback on.
Andy, maybe I'll just start at the top and kind of run it down. I think, to Don's point, we'll kind of skip over some of the boilerplate, but we'll concentrate a little bit more on the meat. Just skipping to the end real quick, we have some attachments at the end that, again, Andy's highlighted as far as contracts and stuff like that. We left the MSBA verbiage in there, but we'll talk with Jared and figure out what the best option is for contract as well. So that's some of the boilerplate stuff that we still have to work out. But we basically, we're starting at the top of the page here. We have the invitation, just kind of outlining what we're looking to do. We're looking to get a contract for feasibility and schematic only. We're not looking to hire somebody through the end of construction documents. So we have that. Town is in process of adopting a resolution. That was what Andy was just mentioning. Is it, we have net zero. Are we looking for LEED platinum, LEED gold, LEED silver? What is the classification there? And again, it can be a goal. It doesn't have to be a requirement. But what that tells the designer is that LEED is important, net zero is important, and they have to have people on their team that have that experience, basically.
So is the discussion or recommendation about LEED something that comes from the design committee? Where does this?
It would come from the committee at some point, maybe the design subcommittee.
Well, what's the working process to settle on, whether it's LEED or some other certification process? What's the?
We can talk about it next Thursday
Okay.
at the design
So
subcommittee.
that's open,
Yep.
and it's something for us to kind of work through. Okay,
Yep.
great.
And I think there's a sustainability subcommittee that maybe
Right.
wants to get on the same page and make have the discussion at the design subcommittee next Thursday so that we can all come to an agreement on what the language wants to be.
Because there's a lot of fluidity around these standards, certification processes and so forth, and I think, it could be very important for us to understand them, evaluate them as alternatives, and settle on what we're gonna do and why, from a process point of view. I'm not saying LEED is good or bad, I'm just saying that we really need to step through that due diligence wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Similarly, again, just kind of going to the $50 to $75 million, that's something, again, that we should think about. That was based off of a potential $100 million. It could even be more than that, but.
Should we be consistent with the OPM one where we said may range from 80 to 100 million and just have it?
I think the 80 to 100 was total project cost.
Okay, so
I think
you're
what we're
talking
trying to say here is the construction
budget.
Because, again, from the OPM side, we're gonna be dealing with FF&E and technology and all that other stuff that the designers are part of that, but it's not necessarily the construction budget. And we could actually add that verbiage. The construction budget is 50 to 75. The overall project cost is between 80 and 100.
I think for consistency, because not your lay person may not, if someone is not in the field, someone they may get confused and say, well, in this one they said 80 to 100 and not understand the difference between construction cost and total project cost.
Okay, I don't think you can produce 2 pages with different kinds of numbers. You have 100 million in the project charter, and you have 50 to 75 in building the school. These go together. We should not have different dollars.
Yeah, so to Don's point, we can clarify with the HR, we should have them both clarified.
Because people will, into schematic design, people will be confused why there are different numbers out there. There's construction cost and there's total project cost. And if we're really clear in using that language consistently, then hopefully people understand there are soft costs on top of construction costs that will take you to a total project cost.
And I'll show you that every time Bill says
that
it.
we have publicly is $80 to $100 million, and that should be clear in terms of the overall project cost, and whatever else you put in there should be noted as a part of that.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right, so the next sections are specific to MBE, WBE requirements, which is minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. Typically, you require the designer's team to have sub-consultants that are fall into those categories. So that's pretty much a pretty standard thing. I've seen communities where they raise those numbers. They don't typically lower them, but again, we could have that discussion if needed. Down here. So the background here. This is information, Andy, this was pretty much pulled right out of the OPM RFS, so giving a little bit of history on it and a little bit of background on the project. So again, if there's things that we need to adjust here or add or supplement, but what we try to do here is just take the information. Again, this is kind of our first meeting with the big group, and a lot of the information we have is just the analytical, what we've gotten in the document previously. So as we work with you and understand it a little bit better, we can work on adjusting that a little bit. Your input will be valuable in this part right here. So I think this is where we want the team to focus in on starting this page here and going on down.
So Mike, also I got some of the information from the Find Go study and the statement of interest that Jared put together for the MSBA in 2017. So I want to use that document as the attachment to this RFS. So the more information we can get out there to the designer, the more the better.
That's a good point. So the statement of interest, which was submitted to the MSBA, which is kind of what they need as a minimum to understand what your project is, we thought that information may be helpful to provide to the designer, so again, they can understand. That's what the MSBA would be getting, so that's what we should be, doing basically similar there.
And designers are used to getting that and reading through it as sort of background to understand the issues.
So some of that information will be repetitive because we've got it here, but then it's in the statement of interest, which I forget which, if it's attachment C but it's one of the attachments we have. All right, so in right here, this section here is where Andy talks about the statement of interest here. Right here. So we talked a little bit about sustainability, and again, if there's something more substantial needed there, that again is really the areas that we're looking to have the team focused. Then we have section B here, project goals and general scope. Again, this is more information specific to the project. So again, this is the areas, if there's any input, that would be great to have that. We talked about the 2 existing buildings, the number of students that were, the 736, I think we are going up to 760 in the new design.
Said 750.
Yeah, okay.
The charter has some.
So again, we just want to make sure we have the right enrollment and projected enrollment in for that.
Does anyone know where that came from? The projected enrollment?
We've gone as high as 742 in the last 3 years.
Yeah, we need to revisit that as part of the process here.
Yeah, I'm only asking because it will affect,
Yeah.
spaces and
Yeah.
and the MSBA has a process that they do ahead of the designer getting, they do an exhaustive, they look at birth rates, death rates, major building projects, and they look at a
And
lot
then
of.
they tend to open buildings smaller than
Yes,
current population.
and they say they account for, when you build it, they will come, like there's a theory that,
No, we need to spend
people-
some time in that, look at the projections.
So I guess that's why I'm asking, I don't know the history, so.
They're rough estimates based on current enrollments. We do have smaller classes in the elementaries than we do in the middle school right now. So that's some of the buffer we might anecdotally expect would account for some kids coming in, because the class sizes are smaller now.
For the
But
purpose
we
of
need
this
to do
though,
more.
they were in the ballpark, but they
Yeah.
didn't know, right?
Yeah, there's also, when you start dividing into sections, you have a certain amount of flexibility, and you're gonna need a little bit of flexibility, because you have multiple grades in there, and you might have a blip, I'm working with a district right now that they have one grade that has 25 kids more than any other grade around.
Yeah, they're in fourth
And
grade
that's
right
literally a
now.
whole
I know
other
right where
section.
they are.
So, all right, so, again, anything on that, and then we have the project objectives. Again, we try to highlight some of the key items here. All of this information, again, is in the SOI, but we're trying to give them a sense of, these are the things that are maybe a little bit more important if you really want to highlight when you submit to us, like, you know, your aspirations, your experience with net zero, your experience with again, if we decide to have a performance space, you know, has your team done performance spaces before? You know, the kind of the minimum is that they've done middle schools before, right? And then, you know, the next step is, well, how many schools in general do they do? If they've only done, you know, 2 middle schools and no other schools, that kind of, so that's part of the evaluation process that we'll work on with the subcommittee. But we've got that, we've got the feasibility study in here. Sorry, very fast. So again, we've identified some of the key items through that process. And then we get into the actual scope of services. So then that actual scope of services is talking about some of the you know, minimums that we're expecting from the design team as far as insurance, as far as deliverables. We're gonna be looking for 2 estimates, one in feasibility, one in schematic design from them. You know, the deliverables that we're going to be expecting. So again, what we've tried to do here, we know we're not going to the MSBA, but the MSBA requires a formal report at the end of feasibility, a formal report at the end of the schematic, and we would recommend to keep that formal process so that we actually have a set of documents that we lock down, that has a budget that we can attach to that set of documents, and that we have a history there, you know, and again, it's that open and transparent process, so we can do that.
What's nice about those, just so everyone knows, they're binders. They're literally, I'm working on one right now that's due next week. They are this thick in addition to drawings. And what's nice about that is that everything's in one place. So if someone in the community wants to understand the history, go back to a specific presentation on a, it's all in one place. So they don't have to go around looking, everything's in one place, and there's a write-up, there's a executive summary that they could just read through those few pages and kind of understand the background. And then there's more write-up that you actually get into color theory statements and massing, like all of these things are important for the community and the taxpayers to understand how we arrived at the solution that we did.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to still require all of these things, even though it's not going to the MSBA for their review and comment. It's still a document that lives, that is available to everyone in the town of Concord.
That's exactly, it has all the space summaries, the DESE submissions, all that stuff, everything's right there in one package. And from the committee's standpoint, when you're approving something, you have a tangible thing that you're approving, you know, you've got that binder, you've got the drawings, you've got the estimate, and that's what, you know, that's the full package.
It's all in one place, and it's really nice.
This is a general question, and I spent a lot of time on it, but when you say there are going to be 2 proposals, one for feasibility and one for design?
2 estimates.
2 estimates. Can you give me a short statement of what is in feasibility versus design?
So feasibility is more high level. It's giving several different options for the building. You know, one might be a stacked building with more stories. One might be a building with a larger footprint and more area, making the same total volume of the building. And you're going through different options, different theoretical HVAC systems, for example.
So it's a phase of the design process that is more general?
Yep, so.
Because there are things about the feasibility, you know, that we've gone through. We've gone through the whole 2 schools, we've gone through the, you know, we wanted in one site, we've gone through a site selection, all of that I would think and many times is included in a feasibility study.
That's exactly right. And when we were looking at the scheduler, I think I mentioned that I shortened the duration up on the feasibility a little bit, but we could potentially shorten that even a little bit more depending on exactly what this committee is.
I just want to make sure it is clear what we are looking for in feasibility, and it's reflected in this document. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this.
That's going to be one of the keys, I think, of the committee next year.
I think it's important to differentiate. The MSBA process divides feasibility into 2 phases. So it's the PDP and the PSR. The PDP is the preferred, I don't even remember, I'm so tired right now because I was at a meeting until 10 o'clock last night. But there's 2 phases. The first phase, you look at all the options. If there are multiple sites, if there are multiple configurations, we've sort of done that. So the second part, the PSR, which is the preferred schematic report, and that identifies what your final solution should be. So coming out of that, you've looked at all these options, and you've looked at a preferred solution.
We're really focused on 2.
So so I think you want to do a cursory, like make sure that what Feingold did a few years ago is kind of in line with what we still think, and then really focus on that second piece, which brings you to a preferred solution. And then the cost estimate that comes out of that is a big picture. It's oftentimes maybe it's, you know, cost per square foot, because a lot of times you're doing multiple options at that point. But it's a looser cost estimate, and then schematic is actually like there are drawings and systems and things that so so that's the differentiation between them, if that's helpful.
I think that's exactly right. I think the only other thing I would add to that is, I think you've gotten, say, 75% of that phase one. The final 25% might be that you know the site that you want, and you know you want new buildings, but now you're exploring options for that new building. That would typically be part of that first phase, because typically, if it was the PDP for the MSBA, you'd have a renovation only option, you'd have an addition renovation option, and you'd have a new option. They require at least 3. Typically, you give 5 or 6. Because what you do.
14.
You start with 14 or 20, but you narrow it down for the submission to 5 or 6. And you have
15 minutes left here?
Yeah.
Okay, and I want to make sure that the people around this table who are going to be giving input to this process understand that and have any, and if they have any questions, specific questions related to the document, what's in it. Because this is like the next 7 days.
Well, I guess, I just, project objectives in this, page 3 is really capabilities that we're looking for. It's not really an objective. People need to know how to do these things, correct? These things will be done, but what we're getting at is we want to dig into what the designer's going to be capable of.
Right. I think what we're trying to say is these are the things that you're looking for in your project. They're capable
To happen.
So I think that's really the area we need to focus on. Andy did highlight, just so I can get through the whole document here, he did highlight the project schedule, and if you look, we have a milestone with dates, and then we have a second option with weeks. If we think this may drag out a little bit, maybe we change it to week format. Again, that's just kind of a formatting thing, whatever the committee prefers. Minimum qualification. So this was at the beginning of the discussion, I mentioned that we would create a sheet that summarizes all the proposals we received. And the first top part of that section is the minimum requirement. So anything that's in this section is what they absolutely have to have in order to just qualify to even, propose, basically. So again, that's pretty important. There's a lot of things that aren't minimum requirements, they're preferred requirements, if you will. And that's what we're stating up above in the objectives.
You have a point. Before I forget it, I would stay with the dates, not the weeks. Okay.
Okay.
I know we're sort of on a non-MSBA track. I just didn't know, and I know having in your selection criteria you have reference to MSBA projects. I didn't know, and I guess Don, I would refer to your expertise on this, if it was worth in the minimum criteria having MSBA experience, even if we're not doing it that way, because I know you kind of narrow the focus, but the MSBA people have designed a lot of schools, and if we say we want as a minimum someone who's done an MSBA project, even though we're not doing it that way.
You could say that, or you can maybe say a minimum of 2 middle schools, or a minimum of 3 schools of similar size in the last 5 years, or there's definitely ways of getting that in there.
Yeah, I just think from an experiential standpoint, I didn't see in the minimum things that really screamed out, tons of school experience.
Yeah.
And that's just a minor thing. In the energy efficiency thing, you referenced National Grid and Eversource. I would just say all applicable utilities.
To answer to your question, I did highlight that on page 8. Application for the MSBA, that's one of my questions, if you want to use that. So now I get the answer. Thank you.
Anybody else, specifically also on the design committee, because you're the task next week.
Does the sustainability committee need to meet before Thursday to make a recommendation? And we do have to do that.
I'll defer to you guys.
Okay.
In a perfect world, you'd all at least be on the same page as far
Well,
as
these
the
are going
language.
to be, they're posted open meetings, so I mean, from my standpoint, go to the meeting, okay? Have that committee come to the meeting.
The Thursday meeting.
The Thursday.
Right,
That's what I
but I
would
think
do.
that we
That's
would
what I would
need, the subcommittee would need you could do prior to.
I would encourage that.
Okay. So that's okay to initiate that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you just have to make sure you get it posted 48 hours in advance.
Got it.
I mean, sort of today.
Got it.
So just a question on giving input. So for instance, one of my pieces of input is going to be that on these milestones, I would recommend that we use a shorter time frame and timeline because it's always easier to spread it out with someone later than to bring them in and then say, oh, and by the way, we'd rather open in 23 than 24. Is that the kind of feedback that we're all sending to Jared? Okay, so that will go in there. And then the next question is under selection criteria. The last time, or to select you guys, we had a system of points for each of these pieces under selection criteria. Is that how the process is gonna work this way? And should we be giving feedback on, which of the things in selection criteria is most important and which should have the most points if we're using a point system?
Yeah, it's interesting because usually this goes in front of the designer selection panel at the MSBA. And they
Right.
have their own process.
Right, so we can define
So we
ours.
can absolutely do a similar, point system because we're not a designer selection panel.
Right,
But this is what they typically are looking for, as far as, it's interesting, these are consultants, no? This list, these are all the sub-consultants.
I think
that
the-
they need to be. So,
There's a list of them, and then
yeah, I think this is typically the list of
That's what you
consultants
okay,
we
typically
put
that's the
together.
consultants.
Yeah, so that's not a
That's not what I
criteria.
hadn't even looked
Yeah,
at.
so I don't know if anyone wants to go back to the OPM one and, use that as a guide and update it for a designer rather than, I can certainly, or myself and Jared could take a stab at something, but we wouldn't be able to talk about it until next Thursday,
Right.
right? So, but we could come prepared to the meeting with something like that so that we at least have something to tangibly,
My assumption was the points and the ranking were helpful to you.
Very much so, yeah, that was my point, is
I
like,
would do it.
that points and ranking system worked the
Sorry,
first time, I would
sorry,
recommend we do.
Yeah, sorry to keep jumping in, but I think you're not an MSBA design panel, but I think for the purposes of Chapter 7, designer selection, you are.
Mhm.
And so I would just recommend that you use the standard parlance of highly advantageous, not advantageous, unacceptable. And then, once you use that scoring, and it can be one is worth, you can then assign numerical values to that, or not, you can just go HAA, all of that. And then you can say, the nitty gritty is 3 schools or more, is that advantageous or highly advantageous? Do you wanna have a minimum of 5 schools designed? That's where you kinda get into the gradient rankings, but I strongly recommend you use that standard scoring format that designer selection committees use.
I'm not familiar with that, I'll be honest. Are you? You're shaking your head no.
We have to,
We can work this.
Okay. Okay, I'm usually on the other side of it, so I don't. I
we
have
also have a format of that, I can send that to you guys.
Oh, great, okay. Andy has a format.
Okay, great. Would you share it with Jared and myself and then?
I understand the scoring, I don't know, I gotta get the panel questions template and then how they did it.
This wheel has already been invented, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, why bring it up? Yeah, no,
I
absolutely.
was just suggesting using that as a format, you can find
Thank you.
1,000 of them without too much difficulty.
Okay, so Jared and I will look at that and either customize it or change it and bring it in for discussion on Thursday's subcommittee.
Other
Thank you.
questions about the RFS document?
If I can ask, if people do email me with stuff, just make it a heading that I will, because I get a lot of emails, so just put in, RFS, request for design services as the subject, just so I can make sure I see it.
I think the only other thing I had, Jared, is on the back here, the attachment B, the contracts. I'll have to work with you on that.
I have
specifically what you want for contracts, yeah.
Can I make a suggestion on the attachments? I know we're doing the statement of interest and we're doing the Feingold report. There was a facilities subcommittee, what was the official name? That
Facilities planning committee.
planning committee, sorry. That did a visioning process earlier this year in
Yeah.
January. I think it will be helpful to include our sort of
Sure.
wrap up to that, so that they know.
Yeah, it's a start at the
It's a
education.
start,
It's
yeah.
not complete, but
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
it would be, I agree.
Is that the version in the OPM RFS?
I don't
No.
think we included that, no, so would you share that, Lori, do you
Definitely.
have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we have only a few minutes left, so I'll just kind of wrap up what's gonna happen. There's gonna be input to Jared relating to the RFS over the next week. There's gonna be a design subcommittee a week from today in this building that's gotta get posted, obviously. The sustainability committee may meet before that and at that meeting.
Well, so
Okay.
just to clarify, if you do, it's a public meeting, we need to post an agenda and 48 hours notice.
Yep,
So if you work with us,
Yep.
that's the
Okay,
best
those
way to
things-
do that.
Are gonna occur. Before our next meeting on the 19th, okay, our management group will get with you guys to talk a little bit about the charter goals process, okay? And work that out. Do we miss anything else in terms of next steps, okay? Again, our meeting is in this room on the 19th, okay? Again, 7:30 to 9. And with that, I would take.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just one more, it's such a scheduled driver that I wanna put, I did find out from the clerk, you can conceivably have the debt exclusion vote on the presidential ballot.
Okay.
I just, there was some question of that, but that's a big scheduled
If we want
driver,
to.
so
I would suggest you show pointing out the
Our
benefits.
turnout would go up.
Well, right, I just wanna make sure to point that out, because their work on the schedule is gonna be back off of that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Good to know,
and I
thank you.
always wanna have, is there any input from any others? Yes?
Harlan Reed, League of Women Voters, got a question. How does the schedule interact with our current MSBA application process?
I can answer that. So right now we have an SOI, again, into MSBA. They will be on site on the 24th. They're every other year, then you submit and you're in the queue. They come out and update their documentation of the facilities. We would expect to hear back from them just in December, as we have the last 2 years. We're in the later round, just like we have been in the past. So that's the timeline there. We won't know anything until December, at which point we would have to assess where we're at and make modifications. Everything's happening very much the same as it has the past 2 years, so.
So again,
Whatever
the key date where there was, where we would know if we were. at the-
Usually it's the week after Thanksgiving that I get notified.
That answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Anyone else from any questions or observations? All right, so thank you all. I know whenever you begin to engage in the project at this level of detail, okay, the discussion sometimes is a little choppy because there's various levels of detail that people want to discuss, but I think this was a good start, and I appreciate the work you did on an incredibly short notice in order to.
Without a contract.
Without a contract.
And on a computer yesterday, I think, right, yeah, for a period of time, in order to prepare for this. So I think we made a good start here, and we're really looking forward to working with you all. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.